And it's an interesting situation. It's not because of Google's going to cause a disaster or something like that. It's just there's a thing that's happening that's so big, it's bigger than everything else, and it's going to cause a total disaster if we can't get people to change their idea on change. So let's talk this through. It's important. You got to think real hard. Imagine 10 years ago, before the internet, what would Google have been like? Okay, you would have had to fill out a card, write your name on there, put a stamp on that, and mail it off, and wait 30 days for your result to come back. Right? That would be not unlike going to the library and using the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature to go find the magazine to look through the 20 magazines. It's not that it wasn't there, but it was so hard to find, you wouldn't have looked for it. So there's a convenience aspect to opportunity. If it's possible but grotesquely unpleasant, then it's as though it wasn't possible because you won't do it. That's why the garage is full of junk, because you could clean it up, but you'd rather something else, right? So things don't happen. They're not easy. Now, what's interesting is there are some subtle patterns. I want you to think about this to see if you can spot the pattern. It's pretty tricky. So I've picked a couple inventions that I think are pretty important. One is the Gutenberg press. Who's read a book that was printed on a printing press? Okay, 2, 3. Okay, not a Gutenberg press, any kind of printing press. Okay, most people here, okay, Alex didn't raise your hand. Most people have read a book. So how about who's heard piano music? Who's heard piano music? Okay. I'm looking at only half the people have heard of piano. You never heard of piano in your whole life. Okay. So how about the telegraph and teletype? Anybody, probably wrong generation, have used those things. There's a great book called The Victorian Internet that describes the invention of the telegraph. It's a fabulous book, actually. It's really fabulous. First thing they did was to telegraph sports scores to distant cities so that people could win the bets on who's going to win sports things. So it's just like spam and stuff on the internet now. Who's ridden in an airplane? More people than have read a book. How about a microwave oven? Everybody? Okay, who's done something other than, who's popped popcorn in a microwave oven? Everybody? Who's done something else? So, okay, about half maybe, okay. Now, I know you haven't been on the moon, but that's okay. So here's the subtle point. None of these things are important for what they are. They're important for their dates. And I want you to look at the dates. So the printing press, totally transformed society, huge impact on human communication. It just was like before and after of the most incredible degree. It took essentially 6 years for Gutenberg to actually print something with it after he invented it. I mean, it's in his house. He made it. It took him 6 years to print something with it. Okay, that's the pace of adoption in your own house. 6 years. And then it took 50 years before they thought about putting page numbers on books, for example. The development of the things you see in books, like a table of contents, was like 200 years later. An index was like 50 years after that. These things weren't, it wasn't like Gutenberg had that in mind. He had, squeezing metal on ink onto paper in mind. No other part of it was part of Gutenberg. The piano was invented, different tuning mechanism. You couldn't play any modern music. Right? The piano was there for 30 or 40 years before somebody thought about how to do the kind of tuning that would make music, the kind that Ron composes, by the way, sound good. But the difference in there is like about maybe 300 years, 250 years. Then we have the telegraph, another while. Then the Wright Flyer is only like 40 years or so after the telegraph. And then we have the microwave oven, which I know it's a minor thing, but the technologies in that are like incredible, compared to like logs. It's just pretty amazing. Just a matter of like 40 years. Okay, going to the moon is like 20 years. So here we have a guy takes 6 years to actually print something with his printing press, right? And then 100 years to go to the next kind of technology. It took 50 years to get piano music around the world, and people in like 5 years, 10 years are like going from the oven to the moon. So these are just examples of a trend. And they're not persuasive on their own because I cherry-picked the examples, but let's look at the trend on a more global scale. If we go back a few billion years and plot on the log scale, which we don't do a lot of log scales in GIS, but the world would look different if we did that, wouldn't it? So either huge Canada or really small Canada. But if you look at that, there's kind of a linear smoothness to these major actions. That's the key point. It's like every little bit, there's some big thing that happens, and it's just kind of progressing along. It's like a leaf going down the stream. You know, it's here, and then it's a few feet further, and a few feet further. It's just cruising down the stream. The only problem is that that isn't a linear axis. It's a logarithmic axis. All right? So it's like, you know, millions of years for a finger width at one end and hundreds of seconds on the other end. And that actually is the entire story, essentially, that I want to talk to you about today, or the most important part of it, that something interesting is happening. And what's interesting is that we're right there at the end where the interval between big things is measured in like a year or a month, not in decades and centuries. And that has profound implications for a number of things. So let's take another way to look at this. There's the time you invent something, like you invent the printing press. Then there's the time it takes people to like think it's a good idea, and they want one too, and they print something. Pamphleteers, you know? Okay, so it took on the order of 25 years, 30 years for a fourth of the people in the US, maybe it was faster in Canada, I don't know, to have a telephone. They had all heard of the telephone. They knew somebody that had a telephone. Maybe the mayor had a telephone, or rich people had a telephone. But, you know, for a quarter of the people to have a phone was about 25 or 26 years. Okay? Well, when radio came along, it was only like 15 years. Okay? When the television came along, it was like 12 years. Now, they're not all the same gadget, but if you stop and think about it, what made, you know, mom and dad able to get a television quicker than grandma to get, you know, a radio? You know, what would that be? Well, there's no intrinsic reason why that would be. There's just something about, you know, once you have an iPod, you think to download applications for it. You know, there's a kind of a speed of operation of certain things that begets further speed. And if we go over the right here, PCs were pretty quick. Mobile phones were even quicker. And the web, pretty much the miracle of the web is that Tim Berners-Lee did it, and then a few years later there were 100,000 websites. A few years later there were 100 million websites. Now there's a few billion websites. So like the pace is pretty clear what's happening. So if we look at the last decade, it's actually gotten a lot faster. For normal things, we're down around a year. And I'll just quickly go through this because a lot of people came online magically, lots and lots of searches, 500 million Google Earth downloads. But it was a 4-year-old product, 500 million people downloaded it. So if you want to divide that out, that's about 500,000 a day. So 500,000 new people, first-time people, download and install something every day. What were they doing yesterday? You know, like, you know, they didn't, you know, I mean, you know, like they all stopped to do that. Somewhere around the world, you know, the guy's in some island somewhere in a hut, and he's putting the disc, you know, and it's fascinating to me that something that 4 people could do in their dining room, my dining room, could be 500 million people. Not that it's a lot of people, but that the reach of it, that people, I don't know all those people. You know what I mean? They're like far away from me. And even more so for Microsoft Windows, even more so for the TV shows, whatever. The point is that there are things that come to us that are new that we take the day after they're done, or the week after they're done, not like a decade after they're done. That's the point I'm trying to make. Social networks, sudden rise, email, of course, infinite crazy thing. 10 billion YouTube videos every month. There wasn't YouTube 5 years ago, and now people do it 10 billion times a month. So the point is that, you know, I mean, whether they're listening to the archives of Vancouver, or they're looking at Madonna, or whatever they're looking at, the point is they're doing it 10 billion times a month. They didn't used to do it at all. And they did that in over a 4-year period. That's the point. The point is that, you know, nothing changed that fast for Benjamin Franklin. You know, 4 years later, it was kind of like he was using the same technology to make glasses as he used before that. It wasn't like using polycarbonate and then he was using sapphire. I mean, it wasn't changing every month. It was you could actually go to college and learn how to do something, and then you could do that all through your career until you retired. You really can't do that now.